board meeting for, it is March, right? March of 2018. We'll start by roll call. Could you call the roll, please? I don't think your microphone's on.
Sorry about that. Trustee Fouts?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Trustee Hunziker?
Present.
Trustee McLeod?
Present.
Trustee Lehman?
Here. Okay, so the first order of business is the approval of minutes for the January 23rd, 2018 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
I have none. I have none.
No. Hearing none, I call for a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We'll move on to introduction of visitors. We got a pretty small group, so if everybody could kind of get our attention and let us know who you are and go around the room, please, starting with Mr. Kaplan.
Kaplan, attorney for Polk Firefighter Association.
Alan Firschwater, president for the firefighters.
David Short, retired firefighter.
Josh Shipman, local 43 secretary treasurer. Frank Del Carlo, liaison from fire.
Henry Gripper, Portable Police, retired.
Franco Lucci, City Attorney's Office.
Kimberly Mitchell, Fpdr. Stacy Jones, Fpdr. Olivia Bachman, attorney with the Public Safety Labor Group. Jessica Kisako, FPDR.
Julie Howe, FPDR.
Thank you very much. It is now public comment period. Do we have anybody signed up to speak? Nobody signed up. We'll move on. We'll move to the action items. And the one item today is the annual adjustment review. And I think we have a presentation.
It's another exciting presentation from me, Stacy Jones, FPDR Financial Manager. So today we are going to talk about the pension cost of living adjustment for July 1, 2018. Let me make sure the presentation is popping up on the screen. It looks like they're taking care of that. So as most of you know, typically pension beneficiaries get a cost of living adjustment on July 1 each year. It is required for FPDR1s because the charter defines the FPDR1 pension as a percentage of active duty firefighter or police officer pay. So they will get an increase equal to any increases in active duty pay during the fiscal year on July 1. So I will just explain that, but there's no board decision to be made for FPDR 1s. But FPDR 2, the cost of living adjustment for FPDR 2s is entirely at the board's discretion. So what we're here to do today is to hopefully make a decision about that. So first I'll talk about the COLA just in general and explain the FPDR 1 pension COLA to you. And then we'll turn our attention to FPDR 2s, and I'll give you some background and kind of an abbreviated history. Trustee Lehman has lived the history and probably does not want to hear about it anymore.
No, I want to hear it.
You want to hear it all over, every year you want me to come back and tell you about it. I wish I could give it like a different twist or something, but it is history. It is what's happened. And then at the end, if the board feels ready, you can vote on what the FPDR 2 pension COLA should be. So as always, feel free to stop me at any moment. It does get a little complicated in a numbers kind of a way. So first, just a quick reminder of what a COLA is and why we might have one. It is a plan benefit. It's a very expensive plan benefit, or from a different perspective, a very valuable plan benefit. The purpose of a COLA, of a cost of living adjustment in any context, is to protect purchasing power. The aim of a COLA is usually to reduce the impacts of purchasing power erosion, the impact of time on a fixed amount of money. In some cases, the goal is to prevent it altogether, although that's a little more unusual. And an easy way to think about it is that if you went to work for an employer and you worked for 30 years and you never got a pay raise, your employer could say, I never cut your pay. But in real terms, they cut your pay every year because of inflation. And that's just because a dollar today is not worth what a dollar was 30 years ago. And it is not worth what a dollar will be 30 years hence. So that combination of the time value of money and the erosion of purchasing power over time is what a pension COLA is, or any COLA is intended to limit. And COLAs are particularly important in the context of pension plans because retirees typically spend so much time receiving a pension benefit. And you can see on your screens that at the median, members receive their pension benefits for 29 years, and then on average, their surviving spouse goes on to receive their pension for another 5 years. And we have no reason to think that that 29 years won't get longer as longevity continues to increase. So we are talking about a very long period of time. Our median pension benefit for just the folks who retired between February of 2017 and February of 2018 is $6,574. So if I ran that out 29 years to 2046, if we assume 2.75% annual inflation, that benefit would be worth, in terms of purchasing power, less than half that amount. So the pension COLA is intended to at least partially address that erosion. On the other side of the coin, it is a plan benefit, like any other plan benefit, and it is a very expensive benefit. When you talk about a couple percentage point increase in a benefit in any one year, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you do it every year and you compound that impact over time, it's a very expensive plan benefit, and it's a big part of our liability. So we also have to think of it in a fiscal stewardship sense. So I'll talk just on this one slide about the FPDR 1 cost of living adjustment. So remember, I'm sure you all do, that we have two kinds of retirees, FPDR 1s and FPDR 2s. The FPDR 1s, for the most part, are those who were retired in 1991, already retired in 1991. And when I talk about retirees, I might go back and forth between retiree and beneficiary, but we're really talking about all beneficiaries. So that's retirees as well as surviving spouses and alternate payees when we're talking about both FPDR 1 and FPDR 2 COLAs. So the FPDR 1 COLA is explicitly defined in the charter, and I've excerpted it for you there. So there's no decision for the board to make. Their pensions are a % of active duty pay, and it's trued up every July 1. So any increases in pay that a top step firefighter or a top step police officer, as the case may be, has had during the fiscal year, they're going to get that same percentage increase the retirees are on July 1. And all of our FPDR 1 beneficiaries are getting really sizable increases on July 1 this year. These are the largest that I've seen since I have been here. And that's because there are two factors. One is the pretty large CPI wage COLA that all of our sworn firefighters and police officers, indeed all the represented employees in the city, will be getting on July 1, which is 3.6%. And then there are also increases above and beyond COLA in each of the current contracts, in the PFFA, Portland Firefighter Association contract, and the Portland Police Association contract. So if we look first at fire, FPDR 1 fire beneficiaries are going to get 4.64% on July 1, 2018. That's the combination of a 1% raise in longevity pay that took effect in December of 2017, so they'll get that on July 1, 2018. And the 3.6% for the CPI increase that all represented employees get at the City of Portland, and that is the Consumer Price Index for wage earners in the Portland-Salem MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. So the combination of those two is 4.64%. I do want to point out that that is on top of the 3.22% increase that they just received in February as a consequence of the new PFFA contract. The new PFFA contract that became effective in December of 2017, you might recall, had retroactive cost of living adjustments, 1% retroactive back to July 1, 2016, and 2.2% retroactive back to July 1, 2017. So that resulted in a 3.22% increase in February. Now, since those were retroactive back to a July 1, FPDR also issued retroactive payments to FPDR 1 beneficiaries and immediately increased their pension payments because we were truing up to past July 1s. So I'll just take a little side note and talk about retros in case anyone's curious. We sent out all of our FPDR 1 pension retros in February. There's about 250,000 of those to both FPDR 1 retirees and surviving spouses, also alternate payees. We also had some retroactive funeral benefits. So all of the pension retros have been paid at this point. We have to wait for the city to publish the new pay rates and get ready to make their retroactive payments. And as soon as that has happened, we will make all the disability retroactive payments and also make retroactive payments on PERS contributions for FPDR 3 members and leave reimbursements to the Fire Bureau and modified duty payments to the Fire Bureau where we subsidize folks who are working light duty. And we expect those to be about $300,000, and I can't tell you when those will go out because we're waiting on the city, but I'm hoping it will be in April. But we don't know yet for sure when those will go out. Any questions about the FPDR 1 fire increase? I mean, do bear in mind that FPDR 1 fire folks got no increase at all on July 1, 2016 or July 1, 2017. And now in February, they got the 3.22, and now they're getting the 4.64 on July 1, 2018. FPDR 1 police will get a 6.71% increase on July 1, 2018, and that's the combination of the 3% pay raise that all top step police officers got on January 1, 2018, and the 3.6% wage COLA that they will receive on July 1, 2018. So that 3% raise is the second of the 3% raises in the current PPA contract. So that is everything for FPDR 1. Any questions?
Quick question. Of these changes here, what was anticipated in the most recent actuarial valuation?
In the most recent actuarial valuation, oh boy, I'd have to go back and look. The 1% longevity increase for fire was definitely not anticipated. I'm trying to remember what the COLA assumption was. I'd have to go back and look, but I believe it was 2.9%. So I believe we have some. The 3% for the PPA was known at the time of the last actuarial valuation.
That's kind of what I was recollecting. So a good portion of this is in there, but the retroactive for the fire probably wasn't.
No. And, well, the retroactive, the 1% and the 2.2% was, because we assumed, we chose to be a little conservative and assume that those would wind up being paid. But the 1% increase for longevity pay was not included, and the COLA assumption was lower in the last valuation, but I just can't remember how much lower. All of these were budgeted, however. So in the budget that you guys saw in January for just fiscal year 18-19, we knew about all of this at that time, and it was all included in the budget.
Thanks.
Yes, great question. Thank you, Trustee McLeod. All right, so that is the FPDR 1 COLA. I mean, it kind of is what it is. So now let's move on to the meat of the topic today, which is the FPDR 2 cost of living adjustment. So FPDR 2 retirees are everyone who was still working in 1991 for the most part, and everyone who has been hired since then up till 2007. Folks hired 2007 and later are FPDR 3s. So it's a big group of retirees and a younger group of retirees. And here, this is a different story for the board. The board has very broad discretion with the FPDR 2 COLA. I've excerpted the language again, so you can all read it. And the upshot of that language is that the board can choose whether or not to give a COLA. It can choose any amount for a COLA, and it can give a COLA at any time with one very significant limitation, which is that the board cannot exceed the COLA that PERS gives its sworn retirees. So the topic of what it means to exceed what PERS gives its sworn retirees became kind of a hot topic in 2014 after the legislature started changing the PERS COLA. And so the board asked for an opinion from the city attorney's office, and the city attorney's office said it was legally defensible to interpret that to mean that the FPDR board can't exceed the biggest increase that PERS is giving to any sworn retiree, which is 2%, because PERS now has multiple COLA percents. So sort of the parameters of your authority are 0 to 2%, and you can give an increase at any time. As far back as I'm aware of, and certainly as far back as I've looked, the board has always given a COLA to FPDR2 beneficiaries, and it's always been on July 1. And I would caution the board, or not caution, but just throw out there that if you chose to do less than what PERS does, you can't choose to do more, but if you chose to do less, it could trigger an off-cycle equal to or better than test. We're required to be at least as good as PERS. We get tested for that every 12 years. If there's any significant change in plan benefits, we have to have a new test. So just to be aware of that. So that is the board's authority. Any questions about what you guys can and cannot do? You know, we could always bring Franco up. He looks really bored over there. So now let's talk about what the board has done in the past. If I had to boil it down to one sentence, I would say that the FPDR board has mostly done what PERS does. They have mostly used the PERS methodology. So this slide, it kind of tells the whole convoluted story, and I tried to condense it to one slide this year. So I've broken it into 3 periods of time, and I will be brief. Like I said, Trustee Lehman has lived through this, and Trustee Hunsaker and Trustee McLeod heard about this last year, but it's still probably a little confusing, and Trustee Fouts is new to the board, so I'll just go over this briefly. Until July 1, 2014, it was just as easy as could be. The FPDR board did exactly what the PERS board did. They used a methodology called old PERS, and you guys are going to hate me by the end of this with all the talk of old PERS and new PERS and modified PERS. But we call this old PERS. And don't worry too much about what it means, because in the next couple slides I'm going to show you those methodologies. But the upshot of old PERS is that most retirees most of the time got 2%. And I'll explain that in a moment. And then in 2014 and 2015, we entered what I sort of think of as the dark ages of pension COLAs, where there was a lot of changes and a lot of confusion. So the Oregon legislature in late 2013 changed the PERS COLA methodology, and they changed it to be 1.25% for everybody. And then they later changed it to be 1.25% on benefit amounts up to $60,000 a year and 0.15% on benefit amounts beyond that point. So for the July 1, 2014 FPDR2 COLA, the FPDR board chose to do what it had always done, and that is to do what PERS did. So that's what they did. Then in May of 2015, the Oregon Supreme Court issued their Morrow decision, which partially overturned the legislature's changes. Essentially, the Morrow decision said, you know, you can do what you like with the COLA as long as it is effective only for service accrued after the date on which you change the COLA. For service accrued before that date, you have to do old PERS. You have to do what you've always done. So for July 1, 2015, the FPDR board and the PERS board were operating in tandem. FPDR board didn't have the benefit of knowing what the PERS board was going to wind up doing. A COLA decision had to be made in time for the July 1, 2015. So the FPDR board decided to just revert back to old PERS for July 1, 2015, and then they retroactively increased the COLA for July 1, 2014 to old PERS. The PERS board also reverted to old PERS for July 1, 2015, but they didn't do anything with July 1, 2014. And then in the fall, after they'd had time to sort of process the decision and go back to their board, they adopted the new PERS methodology, which I will also explain in a moment, in response to the Morrow decision. And then they retroactively applied that to July 1, 2014 and July 1, 2015. In the beginning in July 1, 2016, so for July 1, 2016 and July 1, 2017, PERS has been using their new PERS method, which I'll explain, and FPDR has used a slightly slightly modified version of that, which we have taken to calling modified PERS because we are finance people and not very creative, and we can't think of a better name. Are there any questions about what has gone on in the past or anything that you want to add to that, Trustee Lehman?
Nope, it's all here.
No, it's all here. It's like a bad memory. There it all is. I know, I was going to say, it feels like maybe we're emerging into the Renaissance, although no one's going to paint any of this on the Sistine Chapel. These formulas are gnarly sometimes. So I just want to take a pause and make sure everyone understands what these different methods are that we are talking about. So I'll start with old PERS. So the old PERS method that existed all the way up until July 1, 2014 was that retirees got either 2% or the CPIU, which is the Consumer Price Index for urban consumers, whichever was less. Except that in years when the CPIU was more than 2%, they got to carry over that excess and use it to plug the hole in low inflation years. So the best way to explain this is with an example, with this table. If you look at two retirees, we'll look at this first retiree. I'm looking at the top table, and that first set of columns is for someone who retired in January 2008. They retire in January 2008. The CPIU is 3.71%. So they're going to get the 2% because that's lower, but they get to grab that extra 1.71% and stick it over in their fully, imaginary bank. That's just somebody's tracking in a database or a spreadsheet. July 1, 2009, the CPIU is 3.28%. They again get the 2%. Now they get to grab that 1.28% that the CPIU exceeds 2% and add that to their carryover. So now their carryover is up to 2.99%. And now they hit a low inflation year, and these low inflation years are actually fairly rare, although we've had several of them in the last 20 years. July 1 of 2010, CPIU is only 0.12%. But no worries, not for this retiree. He goes back to his bank, he grabs 1.88% out of the bank, adds that to the 0.12, brings him up to 2%. So now his bank has dropped to 1.11%, but he's still gotten a 2% COLA. Then July 1 of 2011, another low inflation year, not quite as bad as the previous year, or as good, depending on how you look at it. 1.25%, again, no worries for this retiree. He goes and grabs 0.75% from his bank, adds it to the 1.25, gets him back up to 2, and now his bank is all the way down to 0.36%, but no worries because the CPIU will kick back up in the next year. Now, if you look at the next set of columns for our retiree who decided to retire in January of 2010, now he is that rare retiree who's not going to get the 2% because this happens only with retirees who retire in low inflation environments. So he retired in a low inflation environment. His first year, July 1, 2010, CPIU is only 0.12%. He has no bank. He has no carryover. He's got nothing. So he just gets the 0.12%. Same thing the next year, July 1, 2011, he also gets the 1.25% because he has no carryover. The long-term effect of this method is that for anyone who's been retired for a few years, they're going to build up a bunch of carryover that will see them through any low inflation period. And you'll see retirees typically have 20, 30% in their carryover, and that's going to get them through any time when, inflation historically is higher than 2%. So the upshot, and that's why you'll sometimes hear retirees refer to it as 2%, because once you've been retired for any period of time, that's what it turns into. And in fact, what it is always for folks, unless they retire in a low inflation environment. So that is what we used to do and what PERS used to do, and it's still relevant today because it crops up again in both new and modified PERS, but any questions about that? No. All right. So new PERS, what does PERS do now? This is what PERS does after all the dust had settled around legislative changes and Supreme Court decisions. This is what they do. It is a different COLA for every person. Everybody gets their own individualized COLA because it is split around the timing of your service, pre and post October 2013. October 2013 is when the legislature changed the COLA. And it is also split around that $60,000 benefit level. So for all service before October 2013, and regardless of benefit size, it's old PERS. So we'll just call that 2% for simplicity. And the CPIU is 4.2% this year, so we don't have to worry about it being under 2%. After October 2013, it's a two-step process. First, you figure out what percent of service they have after October 2013. And then you figure out what percent of their benefit is above and below $60,000. And you apply that to either the 1.25% for the benefit amount under 60 and 0.15% for the benefit amount above 60. So it might be helpful to do an example. You can stop me if you really don't want to hear it. But if we take somebody who has, say, 90% of their service pre-October 2013 and 10% after, who has a $100,000 a year benefit, which is pretty darn nice. That's going to be that's very unusual even in our system. It's super unusual in PERS, but just for illustration. And if we take that 90% of their service pre-October 2013, multiply it by 2%, we get 1.8%. So you take that 1.8% and kind of set it aside over here. Now you go to the post-2013, and you say, okay, well, 60% of their benefit is $60,000 or less. Multiply that by 10%. Then take 40% that's above and multiply that by 0.15%, and you get 0.1, I wrote this down, you get 0.81%. Then multiply all of that by 10%, and you get 0.081%. So now you've got your 1.8% and your 0.081%, and you add them together, and you get 1.881%. So notice that, and stop me if nobody wants me to explain that again, but notice that there are two things to notice about that approach. One is there's intergenerational variance, and the other is that there's economic variance. Intergenerational variance because older retirees who had more service pre-October 2013 are going to get higher COLAs. In fact, they're going to get 2% if they had all of their service before October 2013. And there's economic variance, and that those with higher pension amounts are going to get less of a pension COLA than those with lower pension amounts. And it is kind of interesting because there are two ways to get a higher pension amount. One is to be a higher earner, and the other is to have longer service. So this is that rare case where a pension benefit could be less for someone who had had longer service. So it is a bit unusual, I think, in that respect. Are there questions about old PERS versus new PERS before I talk about the exciting modified PERS? So let's talk about modified PERS, which I think is the most relevant to the board because this is the approach that the board has chosen since July 1, 2016, since PERS has adopted their new method. So modified PERS is just new PERS with the split around the benefit amount thrown out. So we don't care how much your benefit was. There's no split around the $60,000 issue. So for the percent of service before October 2013, you get old PERS, which this year would be 2%. And after October 2013, you get 1.25% with no ratcheting down for benefit amounts over $60,000. If I go back to the example that I just walked through, now we still have our 1.8% for the old before October 2013, 90% of your service times 2%. You still got the 1.8 for service before October 2013. But now for service after October 2013, you just have the 10% times the 1.25% for the 0.0125%, the 0.125%. And you add 1.8 and 0.125, and you get to 1.925% versus the 1.881% in the previous slide. Does not seem like a huge difference, but trust me, the differences will get larger as we go through time, as there gets to be a larger and larger percent of service after October 2013 for new retirees. So what you have with the modified PERS is you still have a different COLA for each person. Everybody still gets their own personalized COLA. But the band of variance is less. There's less width in there. No one could be below 1.25% in modified PERS. And in fact, no one would even be that low because all of our FPDR2 retirees will have some service before October 2013 since they had to start before 2007 in order to be FPDR2 retirees. The intergenerational difference still exists. Older retirees will still get a higher pension COLA. The ones who have all their service before October 2013 are still going to get that 2%, and those who have some service after that are going to get something less than that. But we have thrown out the economic variance. There's no difference for high versus low earners, and you've thrown out, therefore, that impact for longer serving folks. So that's what modified PERS looks like. Looks like Trustee McLeod has a question.
I do just want to verify the relating to your comment earlier that the city attorney concluded that you couldn't do more than the maximum available. So that's a justification for the 1.25%. That's the most that can be provided as COLA for the October 2013.
Well, and actually, the city attorney's office went so far as to say you could give 2% to everyone because all PERS retirees before October 2013 are just getting 2%. So that's the maximum. They said that's a legally, I believe the opinion actually says that either interpretation is legally defensible. Either this interpretation that you can give everybody 2%, or the interpretation that you can do what PERS does. You can employ PERS methodology. Either interpretation is defensible.
Okay, can you remind me of a couple of dates again? What's the effective period for where Tier 2 begins and ends?
So Tier 2 members were in this, there might be some exceptions to this, but we haven't found any yet, were folks who were still working in June of 1991. In June of 1991, there was an election for folks who were still working. They could choose to remain FPDR1s or choose to become FPDR2s. We actually just researched this because we just got this question and we couldn't find anyone who had elected to remain an FPDR1 who was still working. So we're fairly confident if you were still working, not retired or on long-term disability in June 1991, you're an FPDR2. And then everyone who's been hired since then, up through December 31st, 2006. 2006, yeah.
Oh,
December 31, 2006.
Okay.
Yes.
And one last question. Do you recollect when defined contribution account balances, defined contribution benefits became available to PERS retirees?
For the PERS IEP folks, I do not. It was before my time. It was before 2000.
Before 2000.
But earlier than that, I cannot say. Does anyone else know? When the IAP came into existence, I don't know.
Okay.
I thought that was 2003.
Oh, well, so OPSERP came into existence. Well, okay, it might be. I shouldn't speculate.
I think it was about the same time OPSERT came in, so
I think that's
guessing
when
you're
that
right.
happened. Tier 2
2003.
PERS was, there was a spot between Tier 1 and Tier 3. Obviously,
Right.
Tier 2 was a very short amount of time, and I think that was 95 or 96 to 2003.
Okay,
And 2003 is when they did the IAP portion.
all right.
Okay, there actually is a logic to my questions for this digging back, but so roughly we think the window was from June 91 to December 2006. That's the Tier 2
Yes.
pool. And then, and the defined contribution plan availability sounds like it came into effect in 2003.
Although it was never available to FPDR2 members.
Right,
Right.
right. I'm just trying to get my hands around that because I think that to some extent should influence COLA opportunities because PERS members have opportunity to have defined contribution account balances, assistance, supplementation of their benefit, whereas FPDR retirees, Tier 2, do not.
Right, and to use it as you would normally do in retirement as a hedge against inflation, which is how you typically would use a 401k type plan.
Exactly.
And so now I see exactly what you're driving at. So active duty firefighters and employees have access to the city's deferred compensation plan, the 457B plan, which is the government, sort of the government version of a 401k, but the city does not match contributions or require contributions. I know that the participation rate in fire and police, because I asked, is more than half. I can't remember how much more than half, and I don't know how much folks put into it, but it's voluntary and it's unmatched. So it's really like private IRA savings. Another very good point, because that is typically how you would handle inflation in retirement is with those balances. The question that the board has discussed a lot over the last couple of years is why not do exactly what PERS does? Why not blend the rates based on the benefit amounts as well? Why not have that $60,000 come into play and do the 0.15% for amounts over that? So please interject if I forget any of the reasons that we've talked about. But my recollection of the reasons and my own analysis of the situation is concern that the $60,000 is not indexed to inflation. And that 60, it seems that lower rate is intended to impact higher benefit recipients. But without indexing, you'll have medium benefit and low benefit folks get to that point pretty darn quickly. So without indexing, it looks less justifiable as a means testing mechanism, if that is indeed what it was. I wasn't there down at the legislature when they were coming up with this. The second is the concern over what's the rationale for $60,000 over any other number. We don't know what that meant in the PERS context. Even if it means something in the PERS context, it doesn't probably mean the same thing in the FPDR context. In 2014, when the legislature was, right after the legislature had made this change, the median PERS benefit was $28,000 a year, and the median pension benefit for our folks who've retired over the last 12 months is $79,000. So that benefit, that limitation, the different tiers would definitely impact our population to a much larger extent than it would the PERS population. There has also been a lot of concern about just the differences in the demographics. FPDR members don't usually qualify for Social Security, whereas most PERS retirees do qualify for Social Security. Most FPDR beneficiaries are more likely to have spent their entire career in government and therefore be totally dependent on this one pension versus having earned a pension or a 401k somewhere else. PERS beneficiaries are less likely to have spent a whole career service in PERS. And our beneficiaries are more likely to live in the Portland area, which has that higher cost of living than the PERS retirees who live, obviously a lot of them live in Portland as well, but are spread all around the state. And then there's also the concern that sworn employees, and PERS does have this on their sworn, they have a sworn population as well, but that sworn employees spend more time in retirement because they can retire earlier, which makes the COLA an even more valuable benefit for those folks. Those are the concerns that the board has articulated as they've discussed this over the last 2 years. Some of those raised by us, some of those brought up by board members. Am I leaving out any elements of that discussion that anyone can remember?
I think so.
Okay. Are there any questions about modified PERS and what it means? So since modified PERS is the method that the board has chosen to use consistently since the PERS methodology has changed, I want to take a closer look at what using modified PERS would mean for fiscal year 18-19. This is the method that was built into the fiscal year 18-19 budget because it was the method the board has used in the past. So it's part of the budget that you adopted, and it costs about $2 million in 18-19 to give everyone, all the FPDR2 beneficiaries, this COLA. The average increase for beneficiaries on July 1, 2018 under modified PERS would be 1.99%, and that is because the vast majority of our retirees have all of their service pre-October 2013 and are getting that 2%. But there are 216 beneficiaries who would get less than 2%. And of those 216, there are 41 who would get less than 1.9%. And the lowest percentage we would see is 1.75%, and that is for a member who retired in September 2017 with 12 years of service. So not a typical retiree for us, but that's what gets you down to that 1.75% because he obviously had a fairly large percent of his total service post-October 2013. It's easier for some people to think about this in dollar terms when they're thinking about the impacts to retirees. The median increase just for members, so these are just for retirees, would be $118. And the median increase for everyone else, which basically means surviving spouses and alternate payees, we might have 1 or 2 dependent minor children in there, would be $31. And then the range of increases is as little as $4 and as much as $284. It's a much lower increase for alternate pays and surviving spouses, of course, because their benefit is much less than the retiree benefit usually. So that those are some things that you might want to think about in terms of the impact this year for both the cost to FPDR and the impact for beneficiaries. Which brings me to the grand finale, is such as it is, which is the staff recommendation. As I said last year, I think reasonable people could make a good case for a whole range of cost of living adjustment options that fit within your parameters. Very much depends on what the COLA means to the board. It depends on what the value you put on a pension COLA as a planned benefit. Depends on how you wear your hat of wanting to protect retiree purchasing power while maintaining the fiscal health of the fund. And how you view that balancing act. And it also depends on how important it is to the board to maintain sort of consistency with past approaches. So I do think that reasonable people could land in a number of places, but if you're looking for a staff recommendation, and I guess we're giving it to you whether you ask for it or not, although you're welcome to ignore it, is that I think modified PERS has a lot going for it. It has a lot to recommend it. And I'll give you 3 reasons. The first is that it is consistent. The board has chosen to use this method since the dust settled around the PERS COLA changes, and we have heard from retirees repeatedly that consistency is very valuable to them, that knowing what they can count on from year to year is valuable to them. And it's valuable to the fund as well. From a fund management perspective, there's value in consistency and stability. The second reason that we would recommend it is that it continues to maintain that connection to the PERS methodology. This is very close to the PERS methodology, so it maintains that connection to past practice, which had been to use the PERS methodology. But third reason is that it does throw out the one piece of the PERS methodology that gives me as a finance person, and I think has given past boards some heartburn around that $60,000 split and the different ways that it would impact our population from the PERS population, that was built for a population that is really quite different from ours. Those are the 3 reasons that we would recommend that approach. And that is the end of what I have to say, and leave it open for questions and discussion.
Where does the 60,000 come from? Again, just a quick reminder.
I have no idea.
Is it possible that
Find out.
we take a different approach? I mean, like as times increase, we're having a 3.6% increase in July, things like that. 60,000 is almost becoming, I mean, minor, right? And as people retire in the years future, if we're going to use that as the benchmark, in 5 to 10 years, that's going to be less than half.
If the board wanted to do benefit splitting and say, okay, we're going to give a different percent to a benefit amount over a certain amount, then you could adopt the 60,000 and index it to inflation, or you could adopt some other amount.
But as of right now, it's not in the modified plan.
No, it's not in the modified plan, and in fact, that is the one thing the modified plan just throws out.
And I think you just identified a valid reason why it's problematic.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just forget always where it comes from.
Well, and I don't know, and I have tried to find out by talking to PERS folks and a few legislative people what made them choose $60,000, and I have never.
It just appeared in the legislation.
Yeah.
That's all we can find out.
I mean, somebody came up with it somewhere.
Just
but
threw the number out and it stuck.
Well, I certainly wasn't there, but I have been involved in doing similar kinds of pricing, and I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if someone said, this is the target savings we need to be able to forecast, and if we set it at $60,000 and make the breakpoint there, we can meet our forecast for savings in the future. And I don't, that's fine for a program that is suffering from real cost problems and has to ameliorate that somehow, but if that's not the problem of this plan, then to me that it's unjustified to throw that in there. It's like the wear away of health benefits or anything else by simply setting it at a level and letting inflation do exactly what you just explained earlier. So it's very insidious, and I don't think this plan is at a point where it needs to consider taking that kind of action. So.
Yes. Words
Very
from an
well said.
actuary who's been in the trenches during those conversations. Yes.
Any more discussion on this?
Well, I just did want to reiterate, you started by saying how important do we feel, so I can only speak for myself. I think COLAs are very important. This is an important benefit, as you point out. Most of these retirees are not covered by Social Security, or they're not this tier. I don't know whether it was 100% of them or most of them.
Most of them. They would have to have
other employment.
10 years of service in a Social Security covered job, which is pretty unusual for our population.
So given that, and I think the relative lack of a defined contribution plan available to this group of retirees, it gives them another pool of discretionary assets to be able to help weather the inflationary things is not insignificant. I think it's important that they don't have that available. And in general, if the plan is well financed and these increases are generally forecast and it can be afforded to be done, I think that's the right thing to do.
Nice, thank you. So if there's no more discussion, I would entertain a motion.
We do have some public comments.
Oh, we have public comment. Okay, thank you, sorry.
Hank Kaplan?
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Hank Kaplan. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Bennett Hartman Morrison Kaplan, here representing the Portland Firefighters Association. I don't have that much to add to the very thorough presentation that Stacy offered, other than some perhaps answer some of the historical questions. It's kind of daunting to look around the room and realize that our firm has been dealing with these issues since before the creation of Fpdr2. So we know all the history, and we were also lead counsel in the Morrow case, as well as the Strunk case, which were the challenges to the various phases of PERS legislation. So just to answer a few questions, when Fpdr2 came into existence in 1991, I believe certainly on the fire side, I'm not as familiar with the police, but all of the retirees who were not on disability on some kind of long-term disability were advised to opt into the Fpdr2 system. The ones who were on disability were the ones who remained in the Fpdr1 system for, basically that's the way the benefits calculated out most favorably. Then when the, and of course, as you heard, the Fpdr2 system only applies to people who worked in public safety between 1991 and December 2006. In the middle of that, it was in 2003 that the legislative changes created or did away with the money match, the pool of money available for money match, and instead created the IAP funds, into which the 6% contributions went that were no longer to be matched. For PERS participants, obviously there was no such option for FPDR2 participants. And then, of course, anyone hired after January of 2000 or December of 2006 became members of the OPSERP system, to which obviously you don't have any decisions to make today. I just want to add a couple of things. I do want to underscore the point that Stacy made, that consistency is very valuable. It's more than just valuable. Stacy referenced one external consideration. External, when I say external, I mean external to the charter. External consideration of deviating from the methodology that the board has consistently used for the last few years, being the possible challenge based on an ETOB test, equal to or better than. There's also one other external consideration, and that is all of the public safety union collective bargaining agreements have existing conditions clauses, which would make it legally difficult for the city to change the retirement benefits without violating those existing conditions clauses. And we've had, since 2007, we've had several cases that have gone to the Employment Relations Board and to arbitrators that have basically upheld those challenges. But I would underscore, of course, that if the board accepts Stacy's or the recommendation of continuing the same continuous past practice, then that would not be that external challenge would not be a consideration. I know that every year since the creation of the FPDR2 system, since 1991, the board has consistently and without exception used the PERS methodology in determining what the cost of living adjustment is going to be. And basically, the modified PERS is the PERS methodology, but without the $60,000 cap, which is about which there was some discussion. Just for historical perspective, I believe that in the initial legislation, when it was proposed, The $60,000 cap didn't exist. It was actually one of the initial proposals was the 0.15% increase would apply across the board to everyone, regardless of income. And when people realized how difficult that would be, especially for the very low earning PERS retirees, then they decided to exempt those low earning PERS retirees and kind of arbitrarily decided that below $60,000 you're no longer low earning in a sense. So that's kind of historically my understanding, at least, of where that number came from. So I guess the only other point I would make is that, yes, the board has discretion to visit this every year and decide something radically differently, I suppose, from what it did the year before, leaving aside the external considerations that I've discussed. I would simply urge the board, as a matter of its own internal policy, to adhere to the same methodology, basically for the reason that Stacy indicated, that consistency is valuable. We know that buying power will erode over the course of retirement, even at the maximum COLA permissible under the charter. And we have the same discussion pretty much every year. The same policy arguments, more or less, are raised every year. And thankfully, we seem to come to the same conclusion every year for the past few years, and I would urge you to do so again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Kaplan? Hearing none. Thank you. Anybody else signed up? That's it. Okay. So I would entertain a motion on the benefit adjustment.
I'd make a motion to use the modified program that we've used in the past, as consistency is key. So I'd make a motion we move down that path.
Okay, we have a motion for modified PERS.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on the issue?
I do have one last comment I wanted to make on that, and that is I'm perfectly comfortable with this recommendation and support it. I do think over time, as the percentage of Tier 2 retirees becomes, the percentage of them that has more and more post-2013 service, their relative COLA is going to be reduced, even if we maintain this, eventually to a plateau at 1.25% per year. Just that staff be mindful of that and consider at some point whether, not immediately in the future, but whether at some point in the not too distant future, a recommendation in excess of 1.25%, but less than the justifiable maximum of 2% might be something to be concerned. Just simply because as that group gets closer and closer to being just 1.25% overall, I think it's legitimate to ask if that's really going to even help them keep pace moderately with the erosion of their income. So,
thank you. We will definitely take that under advisement. Yes, and you are right that it will grow less. It'll obviously grow less and less. Yes.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. Being a member, our members appreciate rational thinking and thinking into the future. And while we want to be fiscally responsible, we want this fund to last as long as it needs to last for the members. And some of the stuff with PERS was made because of their budget. We have a pretty sound budget because of the work you do and the way it's set up. So I appreciate that. So
Stacey, can I clarify one point?
Yes, of course.
So the Fpdr 2 participants are not eligible to defer in the 457B, is that correct?
They're not different.
Did you say that they are not eligible to defer?
They are eligible.
Oh,
Fpdr 2, yes, active Fpdr 2 members are eligible to participate in the 457B.
Okay.
There's just no city matching of the four, and they're not required. Yeah.
They're not required.
It's optional.
Okay, thanks.
any more discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. Could you call roll?
Trustee Hunziker?
Aye. Thank you.
Trustee Fouts?
Aye.
Trustee McLeod?
Aye.
And Trustee Lehman?
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you for the
I actually
presentation.
have something for after the motion or the carry. So taking it a step further to answer that question, I wanted to let the motion get through first. Who, through Fpdr, could come up with programs? I appreciate that, and I think it's a fantastic idea, but it's something that I don't just want to have sit on a table. I'm curious who could brainstorm over the next year before we come back to this program and come up with some ideas for us to start considering. Because I don't want to get to the point and then think about it. I'd rather think about it before the point. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
I mean, certainly I and my staff could look at all kinds of different scenarios. If the board wanted to give us any guidance on specifically what they wanted to look at or specifically when they wanted to look at it, we could bring those back to the table next year. I think it will be many years until you start to see a significant impact with this approach. Maybe one way to handle it would be next year when we come back and we talk through this again to kind of identify the point at which it might make sense. You know, where's the tipping point where we start? And let's talk about what the tipping point is. You know, at what point do we now have a median percentage increase that's 1.8% instead of 1.99% or 1.75 or something like that? Would information like that be useful for the board?
This is what I'm looking for. Like if we could, because what's the number for this year?
1.99 is the median. Or the average, I forget which.
You know, if I went to a retirement seminar today, they would give me 3 different amounts, right, based upon different things. What I think would be interesting for us to consider on this is, hey, if us as a board adopted a certain program that would guarantee 1.75 forever, you know, or close to 1.75, this is how we should set it up. Again, consistency is key, right? So anybody retiring once we get closer to that point could say, I know that I'm going to get 1.75 because the board set up prior to this either a fund or something to that effect or some sort of modification. So I'm wondering if you guys could run some numbers similar to like a 1.75, right?
1.75.
Just make as just a starting point, and then give us some guidance on how can we reach that goal? What sort of steps that you could research? And I get tabling it till next year, but I think this is something that we don't need to have in open session, maybe some sort of executive session. Sam could hold something, or independent, or just maybe every other meeting or something like that. Just kind of update us on how we're doing on that progress. It's not like an assignment, but more or less something I think we should really start considering.
Well, I think what you're asking for is something pretty simple, and I think it makes sense to come back and talk about it next March. If 1.75% is, you know, an idea that you've thrown out as kind of, it would be fairly simple for the board to say we want to use the modified PERS method with a floor of 1.75%. I would say that, again, a caution that this board can't bind future board decisions. So if we don't have anyone under that 1.75, you know, next year, then you can't bind future boards to that decision. So that makes kind of the relevance of making that decision. You know, at what point does that decision become actually relevant for somebody who's actually a retiree? What we can do is come back and tell you when we think that will happen. You know, we already have someone who's at 1.75 this year. And it's a little bit unpredictable, the outliers, because we don't, you know, when folks don't have a lot of service and then they retire, they've hit that 55, they've come in with service from somewhere else. That's a little bit unpredictable, but we could tell you, we could make a pretty educated guess about at what point, you know, say more than 10% of folks would be under 1.75. I think I'd need to think about it a little bit more and think about what makes sense.
And maybe you and I could have a discussion as well. Yeah. Kind of what I'm trying to portray. More or less what I'm looking for is the matching idea, different scenarios that we could come up with. And I don't want to have drastic change. Consistency is key, I get that. But
to establish some kind of a floor, basically.
Right, we got to start sometime, right? And if we wait until the year before, oh my gosh, we're almost there, I think that's too late. I'd rather start now where we're all very consistent, we're very on an even playing field, but we're projecting out for the future of those retirees, which is what, 13 years from now, roughly?
And I think there's no harm in the board going on record as saying, you know, this was our intent. Again, it's like, you know, you talk about too late or too early in the sense that you can't bind what a future board might do.
Right.
So, but there's no harm in the current board saying this was our intent, and then a future board may want to go back and look at that intent that's been communicated to retirees. So I think that you and I should definitely talk afterwards, and let's talk about what you want to look at, but I think what you're looking for is not like a complex year-long sort of analysis. I think it's an analysis that we could easily bring back when we talk about this next year, if that's when the board might like to see that kind of discussion. But yeah, let's talk, Trustee Hunsaker, about that idea.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next information items and Fpdr summary of expenditures, I think, was next.
Don't know if anyone has any questions. I'll just point out a couple of things. Since we sent the board materials out early this month, and our meeting is early as well, you'll notice that February had not closed. Sorry, I'm still trying to find it. Here we go. February had not closed when we sent this information to you. So there are some things that you don't see in the year-to-date spending. The PFFA contract retros are not in here since those were paid in February. Like I said, those are about $250,000, and we'll have about $300,000 more in the other retros coming up. It also doesn't reflect the second quarter PERS contributions for either police or fire, because those didn't make it into January. We are just now turning in our year-end projections to the city budget office. We are projecting overspending, small overspending in several categories that we will handle with a contingency draw, which is not that atypical to have those small. In Oregon's local budget law, if you overspend by a penny, you have a finding in your audit report. So we exercise extreme caution in making sure that we do not overspend. But we are expecting to spend a little bit more on capital, which is the database where we've been working on the pension estimate automation project. You've all heard about our crazy volume of pension estimates, trying to get some technology and efficiency savings out of our database. PERS contributions at police have been higher than we expected because they have hired at just unbelievable. I've been working with the police bureau a long time in this job and in my previous job, and I've never seen hiring at this level at the police bureau. So that's resulted in higher PERS contributions than we were thinking. And then our own personnel budget will be a little higher because of wage increases we didn't anticipate in the DCTU contract, the District Council of Trade Unions. We have 4 represented employees. But yeah, overall, disability benefits are tracking a bit low under budget. Disability spending has not been as high. And the pension budget is pretty darn close to dead on. We're projecting less than $1 million of wiggle in a budget that big. That's pretty close.
Okay, thank you. Next was FDNR updates. Do you have something?
FPNR updates, I think Stacy went over the big part, was trying to get all the PFFA retros going in, and she gave you update where we are in that.
Okay.
With that one. Item 3, which is a future meeting agenda. So May, we'll go over the tax anticipation notes, get your authority to do that, and Stacy will do another great financial presentation for you to figure out how we're doing this. Again, the notes are designed because our income starts when taxes in November, but the annual budget starts in July 1, so we have to get some cash to carry us over until we get the income from the tax payments, property tax payments. And she'll go more detail on that. So far in July, we have no topics. We'll just keep that open at this point. September, we'll have the state of FPDR, and we will be doing some small rule amendments there. Typically, I think the ones public records request is just to correct it because the process has changed, and this has got an old process in the rules. Things that are exciting that are happening both in the police bureau and the fire bureaus is they're looking to ways to bring back employees who've become disabled but can't return as a police officer or firefighter. They're looking for other jobs within the bureaus so that they can do their non-sworn positions. The rules that we're dealing with were written in 1990 and 1991 at the time FPDR2 was created. Well, they don't quite address this situation, so we've got to make some tweaks to some of the rules of how we handle a police officer or a firefighter that returns to work for their bureau in a non-sworn position. So we'll be working on just a few tweaks to the transitional duty program to define it a little bit better. And then wage offset, there are some weird quirks put into that. Again, they didn't take into account the people who are returning to the bureau in non-sworn positions. And so this is just a cleanup trying to match with what the bureaus are doing, which is, from a good standpoint, exciting. You can have members who can't work in the field anymore can now come in and work in the bureau in other capacities, so they can stay close to what they've been doing, as well as the bureau can take advantage of some of their expertise. with that and not have to. So that's an exciting, positive thing to do, but we just got to tweak some of the rules to fit that.
And is this something that you're thinking that you'll have at the May meeting to look at the language?
These will come in September.
September.
Because what we will do is probably about mid-August, I will have early August, I mean, we will have when I do our question and answer session on it where people can come in and provide input. Then we, per the rules, have to formally post it 30 days before the meeting, so it'll be posted on or around August 24th. Then they'll be formally presented and voted on in the September 24th or 25th board meeting.
Would there be anybody negatively affected between March and September? Is anybody waiting on us for those rules?
No. This is to bring stuff back in line because because of these programs, we've been doing things a certain way and the rules don't quite support. I just like to get the rules toned up so they're matching what we're doing. So nobody's been hurt by this at all or anything like that. I just want to get it cleaned up.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
Anything on the agenda? Nobody wants to speak? Okay, I think we're wrapping up. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move we adjourn the meeting.
We have a motion, second?
A second.
Motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Let's go enjoy this day.
Thank you, everyone.